My name is Julian Vance and I am 42 years old. For 12 years I accepted my place in Ashwood. You are simply not suited for heavy matters, Beatrice said to me across the supper table. I worked as a librarian. I spent my long working hours filing late slips and stamping overdue notices in the dim municipal basement. A cedar chest sat in the corner of my small study, smelling of old pine and forgotten cotton. It held nothing yet. It would hold everything soon enough. The family law was simple and brutal. What was accumulated through generational quiet belonged by unwritten decree to the sibling who made the most noise about duty. Beatrice made plenty of noise. She filled rooms with complaints about sacrifice while I watched the pages turn. The ledger remained open on my wooden desk as the evening shadows lengthened across the floorboards. Every entry was neat and precise. I did not raise my voice in protest. I simply waited. Stay with me for what comes next down here in this municipal basement. Subscribe to see what was inside that cedar chest sitting quietly in my study. Drop a comment and tell me where you are listening from today. This story is a quiet accounting, not a raised voice. Ashwood has many old stone buildings. Most people never look inside them. I kept my desk organized. I waited for the proper page to turn. You should stay for the rest of this complete written record. Morning arrived with the same gray light across the municipal basement windows. I opened the circulation desk drawers and aligned the ink stamps. Ashwood moved slowly around me. People believed their habits vanished the moment they returned a book to the drop slot. They were entirely wrong. Every stamped date and signed slip left a small, permanent trail. My profession taught me to watch the quiet margins. A borrower might check out heavy volumes on estate law while pretending they only cared for gardening. The paper remembered what oral promises conveniently forgot. Truth lived in the administrative entries. We filed every single day without fail. Beatrice operated quite differently. She trusted volume and endless repetition. She genuinely believed that whoever spoke loudest about family duty controlled the entire narrative in Ashwood. She did not understand the quiet, unyielding power of a properly maintained ledger. I closed the heavy wooden drawer and locked it securely. The morning shift was just about to begin down in the basement. The basement air carried the smell of old paper and damp concrete. I turned a page in the heavy circulation register. Every family operates according to a hidden index of rules. People call these traditions when they want to excuse an ongoing theft of peace. In the Vance family, what was accumulated through generational quiet belonged by unwritten decree to the sibling making noise about duty. Beatrice understood this unwritten statute better than anyone else alive. She practiced the art of loud devotion every single week. Her volume functioned as a legal claim in our household. Father Timothy nodded along whenever she raised her voice in church. The parish priest believed that loud noise equated directly to a faithful heart operating without any hidden malice whatsoever. I sat quietly behind my wooden desk in the municipal basement. My ledger remained open to the morning patron log. Silence was my assigned station in the family archives. A quiet person never qualified for a share of anything substantial. That was the fundamental axiom governing every financial transaction between my older sister and myself since our early childhood years. Beatrice arrived at the library doors just before closing time. Her heels clicked sharply against the worn concrete flooring. She carried a leather folder stuffed with various household invoices. She dropped the papers onto my clean desk without warning. People who demand everything usually bring a thick stack of paper to prove their virtue is entirely undisputed by anyone. You have spent 12 years hiding down here among the old books, she said. Her tone carried the usual weight of familial disappointment. I did not look up from the open circulation log. My pen hovered over a late fee entry for $3. The established family law required all of us to accept her loud performance as an undeniable proof of moral superiority. Father Timothy waited near the doorway with his hands clasped together. He looked uncomfortable in the damp library basement. He offered a weak smile that vanished almost instantly. The priest always supported whatever arrangement produced the least amount of public friction. The aging parish priest always supported whatever administrative arrangement produced the absolute least amount of public friction in town. I closed the ledger with a soft thud. The wooden desk held 3 sharpened pencils and a brass lamp. Nothing else belonged to me in this municipal room. Generational quiet leaves very few footprints on the official records. That total absence of tangible evidence made it extremely easy for someone else to claim the entire family estate. Beatrice tapped her fingernails against the edge of my blotter. She expected an argument or a defensive outburst from me. She needed resistance to justify her theatrical display of righteous exhaustion. I gave her neither of those things during the encounter. A municipal librarian learns very early that every single borrower eventually has to return what they checked out from the shelves. The rules of our family were written in invisible ink. They appeared only when heat was applied by an ambitious sibling. I turned the brass lamp slightly to the left. The light caught the grain of the old oak desktop. Everyone living in Ashwood accepted that loud shouting constituted a valid substitute for genuine care and long-term personal dedication. Father Timothy cleared his throat behind my sister. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He murmured something about peace within the household. His voice sounded thin against the damp stone walls. Weak allies always offer empty platitudes when they lack the actual courage to stand against a dominant personality in the room. The heavy wooden door of the municipal basement creaked open against the uneven stone floor. Beatrice walked inside with sharp and deliberate steps that echoed through the quiet room. She wore a dark wool coat that smelled faintly of autumn rain. Her age of 49 years had sharpened her features into a permanent expression of severity. Father Timothy followed her closely behind through the narrow entryway with hesitant strides. He was a man of 65 years with tired eyes and a loose clerical collar that seemed too large for his neck. I sat quietly behind my wooden desk without making a single sudden movement. The brass lamp cast a pale circle of light across my open ledger. A closed cedar chest stood quietly against the far stone wall behind my chair, holding nothing inside except empty space and dust. I did not look up immediately from my official papers. Beatrice stopped beside the tall wooden bookshelves near the corner with an air of complete authority. She placed her heavy leather-gloved hand firmly on the polished wood surface of the municipal bookshelf before speaking to me directly. "We have handled all the necessary arrangements among ourselves, Julian," she said. Her voice carried easily through the damp basement air. Father Timothy cleared his throat softly and shifted his weight from one foot to the other while the old clock ticked. He kept his gaze fixed firmly on the dusty floorboards. I adjusted the position of my brass pen and dipped the nib into the open inkwell. The ink dried slowly upon the coarse paper surface of the daily log. "You skipped the standard protocol for filing," I said quietly. Beatrice dismissed my remark with a quick flick of her gloved wrist. "Bureaucratic habits do not concern our family matters now," she said with absolute certainty. She glanced briefly toward the corner of the small room. An old framed wedding photo hung crookedly beside the small ventilation window. The glass caught a pale reflection of the metal overhead pipes. "That picture belongs in the parlor at home," she said. I turned a page in my logbook with deliberate slowness. Every administrative entry required precise verification before anything could proceed further. Father Timothy reached out and touched his worn wooden crucifix. He looked entirely uncomfortable within these damp stone walls. "This is highly irregular," he muttered quietly under his breath. Beatrice shot a sharp glance in his direction. Her glare silenced any further protest from the elderly priest immediately. He looked down at his leather binder again. I smoothed a small paper crease in the crisp margin of the daily circulation register while waiting for their next move. The silence in the municipal basement stretched out for several long moments. Ashwood held many secrets within its old stone foundations. Many local residents trusted the municipal Ashwood archive completely with all of their most private reading habits and historical records. I closed my heavy register and laid my brass pen across the cover. Beatrice tapped her fingernails against the edge of the wooden desktop with an impatient rhythm. "We expect your full cooperation by tomorrow morning," she said. Father Timothy nodded slowly without looking up at my face. He turned toward the exit and stepped into the dim hallway. The heavy door clicked shut behind them. I remained seated in the quiet room alone. The afternoon light fell sideways across the polished mahogany table in the formal parlor. Beatrice stood near the tall window with her hands folded tightly in front of her dark wool dress. A checkout record remembers what people would rather forget they read. I thought while watching the dust motes drift in afternoon light. The old house always smelled of dried lavender and floor wax during these family assemblies. The priest sat stiffly on the velvet settee with his leather binder resting flat across his knees. He looked tired and very old in the dim interior. "These matters must be settled without unnecessary delay," he said quietly while adjusting his small wire spectacles. Beatrice turned around from the glass pane with a sharp look in her pale eyes. "You have never understood how the world works, Julian," she said, her voice dropping into that familiar tone of cold instruction. The family rules required absolute clarity on these issues, the old clergyman added, shifting his weight slightly on the springs of the sofa. I kept my hands flat against the wooden surface of the table between us. Ashwood required proper documentation for every transaction that passed through municipal hands. "You are making a terrible mistake," I said, staring directly at the carved crucifix resting against the black cloth of his vestments. Beatrice dismissed the remark with a quick flick of her wrist toward the doorway. "Nobody cares about your basement ledgers when real property is at stake," she said, leaning over the polished edge of the furniture. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck the hour with a dull and heavy thud. Its metal pendulum swung behind the glass door in a slow and mechanical rhythm. "We have handled all the necessary arrangements among ourselves, Julian," she said, echoing words that felt rehearsed for weeks before today. The silence in the room grew heavy and dense like wet wool. A lifetime of quiet labor counted for nothing against the loud insistence of an older sister, who demanded absolute control. Old Timothy cleared his throat and looked down at the dark leather binding on his lap. He reached out with a trembling hand to touch the brass clasp of the book. "The parish registers have recorded every birth and death here for generations," he murmured, offering a mild defense for his presence. Beatrice did not tolerate hesitation from allies who owed their positions to her family's patronage. "Read the terms aloud so there can be no misunderstanding later," she commanded, pointing a slender finger at a typewritten sheet. I looked at the paper without reaching out to take it from the polished mahogany surface. The words were neatly spaced and typed on thick bond stationery that smelled faintly of expensive ink. $40,000 was the exact figure listed at the bottom of the column for immediate transfer. My complete silence seemed to irritate her far more than any loud shout or angry argument could have managed across the room. "You always sat in the basement reading old books while real decisions were made by people with actual responsibilities," she said. The afternoon shadows lengthened across the worn carpet near the entrance doors. Ashwood winters always arrived early and brought a bitter frost that froze the window panes solid. "I am simply recording every detail of what is happening in this room right now," I said, keeping my voice even. The priest closed his leather binder with a soft snap that echoed in the quiet space. "We should leave the remaining details for another day," the older man whispered, standing up slowly from the velvet settee. Beatrice gathered her gloves from the side table and turned toward the carved oak door. She paused with her hand on the brass knob and looked back over her shoulder. "You will sign the papers by tomorrow morning or face the consequences of your stubbornness," she said before stepping into the hallway. Timothy followed her without another glance in my direction. The room fell completely silent once again. The heavy wooden door of the municipal basement remained shut against the cold autumn wind blowing through the quiet streets of Ashwood. I sat at my desk and opened the ledger. The morning hours passed without a single visitor arriving to disturb the quiet. I turned the page and noted the date with my black fountain pen. Silence settled over the shelves of returned books and wooden furniture. After Tuesday afternoon, something shifted in the way I moved through these rooms. I did not raise my voice or argue with anyone about the future. I simply let the space between us grow wider and colder. There was no grand gesture to mark the distance that now separated our lives. People pull away quietly when a cut is never acknowledged by the other person. That is the way my family handled every uncomfortable truth that rose to the surface. I began to clear my desk of anything that did not belong to the municipal inventory. Every loose paper and personal note went into the cedar chest, standing against the eastern wall. The lid of the cedar chest lifted with a dry sigh of old hinges. I placed 3 pencils and a small tin of paper clips inside the dark wood. Ashwood went about its daily business while I organized the bottom of the chest. A circulation record remembers what people would rather forget they read, but I kept my own counsel now. I placed a receipt from the hardware store right beside the wooden baseboards. The brass lamp cast a yellow circle over the green blotter where my hands rested. Nobody came down the concrete steps to check on my work or ask about my intentions. The hours stretched forward without interruption, giving me all the time I needed to sort through my belongings. I folded my winter scarf and laid it neatly at the bottom of the container. The cedar scent filled the small room every time I lifted the heavy wooden lid to add another item. I transferred 12 receipts from the past month into the chest before closing it firmly. A key turned in the brass lock of the desk drawer for the very first time in years. I kept the small brass key in my pocket where nobody else could reach it. The municipal basement felt different now that I had stopped expecting an apology or an explanation. The priest might come back on a different Tuesday, yet I would not be lingering near the entrance. Beatrice assumed silence meant surrender, which was a very common mistake for people who only understood noise. I wiped the surface of the wooden desk with a damp cloth until the grain showed clearly. Every object in the room had its proper place, far away from the hands that demanded everything. I pulled the chair closer to the shelves and began sorting through 20 volumes of local history. Each book went back onto the metal bracket in precise alphabetical order according to title and author. My hands were steady as I aligned the spines along the edge of the dark oak shelf. Ashwood continued to turn on its axis outside, while I maintained the quiet rhythm of my daily duties. I picked up a small ceramic tray and carried it across the room to the dark corner. The tray joined the growing collection of personal effects resting safely inside the wooden container. Closing the lid took very little effort, and the latch clicked shut with a soft metallic sound. I sat back down in the wooden chair and looked at the empty space where my life used to be. You are still here with me. I appreciate that quiet company. Have you ever kept your own silent count while someone else loudly claimed the entire room? It wears down the patience over time, but every single stroke of the pen builds an invisible weight. Beatrice thinks the municipal basement is just damp stone and forgotten paper. She believes her loud demands settled everything permanently. She has no idea what those wooden shelves actually hold. Soon enough, the balance sheet will demand its proper accounting. The seasons shifted outside the frosted window wells. Winter frost gave way to damp spring rains. Ashwood stayed quiet. I stayed at my wooden desk. The weighty, leather-bound lending ledger lay spread out upon the wood desk in front of me each and every morning. Pages turned. Ink dried slowly in the cold air. I stamped return dates on blue paper slips. Patrons brought old volumes back. I checked the library cards by hand. Sometimes I looked at the lone history of the old mining town volumes, while the damp air settled into my bones. The habit took root. My mind began to sort every interaction like a cataloged item. A receipt from the hardware store went into the cedar chest. A note from the municipal clerk joined it. Every single piece of paper found its proper numerical sequence inside the dark wooden box beneath my workspace. Years passed without a word from Beatrice. The priest walked past the basement windows twice. He did not look down. I dipped my steel nib pen into the black inkwell. Another month of records filled the margins. The quiet discipline of the municipal archives became my primary shield against the shifting tides of family expectation. Folders grew thicker inside the drawer. I bought a second box for the overflow receipts. The town council approved new budgets. I filed those documents too. Carefully indexed rows of figures stacked up against the eastern wall. Nothing was ever lost once it entered the system, because a proper librarian never throws away a verified ledger. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Dust motes drifted through the pale shaft of light. I turned another page. Summer arrived with heavy afternoon heat against the frosted panes. Arthur returned 3 heavy volumes on local iron mining. I stamped the blue slips with black ink. Arthur mentioned the upcoming municipal council elections while waiting by the wooden circulation desk for his library card renewal. I nodded and wrote his name down in the daily log. A stack of overdue notices sat beside the inkwell. I signed each official notice with precise black lettering. Autumn brought cold winds that rattled the loose iron window grates outside. Leaves piled against the glass and stayed there until the rain washed them away. The clergyman passed by the basement window on a Tuesday afternoon, gripping his black umbrella firmly beneath his right arm. I opened a fresh box of steel nibs and noted the exact time in the margin. 3 letters from the water board arrived in the morning mail delivery. I filed them neatly and alphabetically inside the thick blue folder. Winter returned with freezing temperatures that frosted the lower panes entirely. The cedar chest against the eastern wall grew heavier every single week. I added 40 receipts from the hardware store to the growing stack. Another ledger joined the first one on the wooden shelf above my head. The careful accumulation of sorted municipal paper records became my only reliable companion through the exceptionally long and silent winter months. A small tin of paper clips sat empty by the corner of the blotter. I placed a fresh cardboard box beside it without making a single sound. Spring followed with steady rains that soaked the stone foundations. A water stain appeared near the northern corner of the room. I measured its width with a brass ruler and entered the dimensions into the index. Beatrice remained completely absent from Ashwood during those quiet months, while her name drifted steadily through local town gossip channels. I kept my pen moving across the ruled pages without missing a single stroke. Several property tax forms arrived from the county assessor before noon. I logged every single serial number carefully before sliding them into the wooden drawer. Another year turned over in the dark municipal basement. The electric clock hummed against the whitewashed brick wall while dust motes danced lazily in the shaft of pale sunlight. More municipal invoices piled up inside the dark wooden drawers. I checked out a history of local iron mining to a young student. The record grew longer with every passing day. A shipment of new library cards arrived wrapped in brown butcher paper. I counted every single paper card by hand and recorded the exact total in the inventory book. Time left physical marks upon the wooden desk. The brass lamp developed a faint patina near the switch. My fingers left a smooth indentation on the cedar lid. Nothing changed on the surface of my quiet daily routine except for the steadily growing weight of the locked drawers. The archive expanded downward into the dark wood of the storage boxes. A secondary ledger was required by the end of October. I purchased a heavy black leather binder from the local stationer in town and labeled the spine with white ink. Summer returned again, with dust drifting through the high basement windows. The circulation register filled its final blank page by late July. I took a fresh volume from the top of the cupboard and sharpened exactly 3 wooden pencils in a straight row. The copper shavings fell neatly into the wastebasket beneath my knees. Every single financial transaction and local library book loan remained carefully accounted for within the silent boundaries of my wooden desk. The ledger sat open on my desk. Ink dried slowly under the brass lamp, Every transaction left a trace. Every missing entry created tension in the room. The town council records showed discrepancies in the municipal accounts. I checked the figures again. 3 items remained unaccounted for in the ledger. Beatrice walked into the basement archive without knocking. Her footsteps sounded tired against the cold stone floor. She dropped a heavy canvas bag onto the wooden chair. Her shoulders slumped noticeably under her wool coat. She looked older than her 49 years in the dim light. A small tremor touched her left hand as she unbuttoned her collar. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a worn handkerchief. I watched her wipe ash from her knuckles. She had spent the morning cleaning out the damp cellar at the old homestead. Ashwood winters were unforgiving on old limestone foundations. She looked defeated for a fleeting second. "I am exhausted," she said softly while staring at the empty cedar chest. "Nobody helps when the walls start leaking water into the cellar." I said nothing in response. I simply closed the ledger by half an inch. The human weight behind her demands finally showed through the armor. She was just a tired person clinging to control. The lie about the estate began to buckle under simple gravity. Our family always pretended everything was entirely under tight control. The paperwork told a different story entirely. $40,000 had vanished from the restricted probate fund. The circulation register recorded every book ever borrowed on estate law. Townspeople read those volumes before consulting lawyers. Beatrice did not understand how paper preserves the truth of human actions. She thought loud declarations could erase quiet arithmetic. Father Timothy walked past the narrow window outside. He paused when he saw Beatrice sitting inside the dark archive. He did not enter the room. He simply shook his head and kept walking down the lane. The fabric of our shared fiction was fraying at the edges. Every receipt from the hardware store documented repairs that never happened. I picked up a red pencil and marked a correction in the margin. The archive held decades of municipal memory within its wooden shelves. Nothing stays hidden when someone keeps accurate daily logs. Beatrice looked at the wedding photo hanging near the ventilation window. Her expression softened into something resembling genuine regret. "We should have asked for help sooner," she said quietly while looking at the faded frame. I kept my pen resting against the paper. The silence between us stretched across the concrete floor. Ashwood kept secrets in every basement and attic. Our family secret was no exception to this rule. The ledger remained open on the corner of the desk. Every column balanced down to the final penny. The system required no raised voices to prove its point. Time exposed every falsehood built on sand. Beatrice gathered her canvas bag and stood up slowly. Her knees made a sharp clicking sound in the quiet room. She walked toward the heavy wooden door without another complaint. The afternoon light faded completely behind the frosted glass. I turned to a fresh page in the daily logbook. Ashwood Municipal Basement remained cold and steady as always. The work continued without interruption. The damp Ashwood Municipal Basement always stayed cold through every season. I kept my entries exact. Beatrice still believed her loud voice could rewrite past years of paper trails. She thought volume equaled ownership. Have you ever watched someone spend years building a trap for themselves, entirely convinced they were constructing a throne? You sit quietly and let them finish the masonry. The final accounting draws closer with every page turned in the quiet dark. You wait patiently for the exact moment the math catches up. The basement air carried the scent of wet cement and old ink. I sat behind my heavy wooden desk. A brass lamp cast a pale circle of light across the circulation register. Beatrice entered without knocking on the reinforced door. She walked straight to the edge of my workspace and placed a thick manila envelope directly over my open daily logbook. The heavy paper rustled against the dark wooden surface, while she waited impatiently for my hand to move toward the pen. She dropped the typed pages onto the blotter. It slid across the green leather. "You must sign this document immediately," she said. Her sharp voice echoed harshly against the low stone ceiling while I remained completely still behind the desk. I looked down at the paper without touching it. We handled all necessary arrangements among ourselves, Julian, she said. Her fingers tapped twice against the edge of the brass lamp. She wanted every detail locked down in ink. The typed demand list lay exposed under the direct light. Every item was carefully itemized in her own precise handwriting at the top, before she had it printed. I picked up a steel nib pen. The metal felt cold between my fingers. "This document lists $40,000 from the probate fund," I said. I did not look up from the ink-stained margin. She stiffened slightly at the mention of the exact sum. "That money was spent on family business," she said. Her voice dropped an octave in the small room. She leaned forward across the Ashwood Municipal Archive desk. The typed pages bore her signature at the very bottom beneath a list of unauthorized property transfers. "A checkout record remembers what people would rather forget they read," I said quietly. I did not raise my voice above a whisper. The ledger pages remained open to the exact date of the missing transfer. She stared at the ink entries with sudden realization. Father Timothy stood quietly just outside the frosted glass window. He held his leather binder against his chest. Neither of us invited him inside the damp basement office. He watched the exchange through the glass for a long moment before he turned away. The document in front of me sealed her entire argument. She had written down every unauthorized action with meticulous care. No external witness was needed to prove the discrepancy. The paper trail provided everything required for the final accounting. I set the pen back down in its wooden groove. The ink dried slowly under the yellow lamplight. "You signed your own name to every single line," I said. She pulled her hands back slowly from the edge of the desk. The silence in the Ashwood Municipal basement stretched out without a single word of defense. The hospital waiting room smelled of sharp antiseptic and damp wool. Plastic chairs lined the pale green walls under humming fluorescent tubes. Outside the narrow window, the town of Ashwood stretched under a heavy gray winter sky. I set my black leather binder on the laminate table between us. Beatrice sat across from me with her heavy winter coat buttoned tightly to her throat. Her knuckles remained stained with old ash from the homestead cellar. Father Timothy stood quietly near the water cooler. He held his wooden crucifix in both hands and looked down at his worn shoes. "This room is completely inappropriate for these matters," Beatrice said. Her voice carried across the linoleum floor with its usual sharp edge. She adjusted her leather gloves and stared hard at the binder. I kept my hands flat against the dark leather cover. I did not speak above the steady hum of the wall heater. The institutional clock above the doorway ticked with a mechanical rhythm. Years of precise entries rested inside the binder. Every signature, every returned volume, every single missing ledger entry was accounted for. "A checkout record remembers what people would rather forget they read," I said quietly. Beatrice scoffed and looked away toward the frosted glass entrance. She believed her loud declarations had permanently secured the family estate under unwritten municipal rules. She thought shouting replaced legal documentation. She was entirely mistaken. The Ashwood Municipal Archive held receipts and bank slips that told a different story. Every unauthorized transfer from the restricted probate fund was mapped across multiple pages of ink. Father Timothy stepped forward from the water cooler. He placed a small white envelope on the edge of the table between our chairs. His fingers shook slightly against the laminate surface. "I found this inside the old parish vestry records from 1994, he said. His voice was barely audible over the noise of the heater. "It shows the original property division before the alterations began." He did not look at Beatrice when he spoke. He offered the single sheet of paper and stepped back. "That paper proves nothing about the missing money," Beatrice said. She leaned forward and tapped her ring against the table edge. Her face flushed with sudden anger in the fluorescent light. "We handled all the necessary arrangements among ourselves, Julian," she insisted. She used the familiar family phrasing like a defensive shield. I opened the binder slowly. The pages inside were crisp and numbered in clean black ink. Every transaction involving the disputed estate was laid out plainly for inspection. The cedar chest back in my basement study held similar proof, but this binder was enough for today. The hospital waiting room smelled of sharp antiseptic and damp wool. Plastic chairs lined the pale green walls under humming fluorescent tubes. Outside the narrow window, the town of Ashwood stretched under a heavy gray winter sky. I set my black leather binder on the laminate table between us. Beatrice sat across from me with her heavy winter coat buttoned tightly to her throat. Her knuckles remained stained with old ash from the homestead cellar. Father Timothy stood quietly near the water cooler. He held his wooden crucifix in both hands and looked down at his worn shoes. "This room is completely inappropriate for these matters," Beatrice said. Her voice carried across the linoleum floor with its usual sharp edge. She adjusted her leather gloves and stared hard at the binder. I kept my hands flat against the dark leather cover. I did not speak above the steady hum of the wall heater. The institutional clock above the doorway ticked with a mechanical rhythm. Years of precise entries rested inside the binder. Every signature, every returned volume, every single missing ledger entry was accounted for. Beatrice scoffed and looked away toward the frosted glass entrance. She believed her loud declarations had permanently secured the family estate under unwritten municipal rules. She thought shouting replaced legal documentation. She was entirely mistaken. The Ashwood Municipal Archive held receipts and bank slips that told a different story. Every unauthorized transfer from the restricted probate fund was mapped across multiple pages of ink. Father Timothy stepped forward from the water cooler. He placed a small white envelope on the edge of the table between our chairs. His fingers shook slightly against the laminate surface. "I found this inside the old parish vestry records from 1994, he said. His voice was barely audible over the noise of the heater. "It shows the original property division before the alterations began." He did not look at Beatrice when he spoke. He offered the single sheet of paper and stepped back. "That paper proves nothing about the missing money," Beatrice said. She leaned forward and tapped her ring against the table edge. Her face flushed with sudden anger in the fluorescent light. "We handled all the necessary arrangements among ourselves, Julian," she insisted. She used the familiar family phrasing like a defensive shield. I opened the binder slowly. The pages inside were crisp and numbered in clean black ink. Every transaction involving the disputed estate was laid out plainly for inspection. The cedar chest back in my basement study held similar proof, but this binder was enough for today. The black binder rested squarely on the center of my wooden desk. Its dark leather cover felt cold underneath my fingertips. Inside those heavy pages lay every single signature and every unauthorized slip. I could easily have walked across the damp stone courtyard to the municipal chambers and placed this precise volume before the council. The council members would have acted immediately upon seeing the written evidence. My sister would have lost her remaining standing in Ashwood entirely. Every elaborate arrangement she constructed over the preceding decades would unravel within hours in front of everyone. The leverage rested right there, inside a simple office item costing under $3. The heavy binder was not hauled up the concrete steps into the glaring sun by me. The heavy brass bell at the municipal office was not rung by me. My request for an official public proceeding was not intended to shame my elder sibling before the town merchants and aldermen who held her in high regard. Exposing her completely would only invite more noise into the world. A public scandal requires endless talking and endless defending from everyone involved. I spent 12 long years avoiding that exact brand of pointless noise. Taking revenge meant entering the identical cycle of bitter performance that defined my sister's entire existence. I preferred the heavy silence of the basement. The pages stayed closed securely inside the dark leather binding. I reached for a heavy brass key and locked the wooden drawer completely. The metal mechanism slid into place with a sharp and definitive click. Ashwood would never know how close the master index came to breaking open for good that Tuesday afternoon. I returned the heavy binder safely to the cedar chest against the eastern wall. The cedar wood smelled dry and clean in the damp room. I picked up a wooden pencil and sharpened the tip over a small ceramic tray. A single wood shaving curled downward and settled neatly against the edge. The Reverend Timothy could have labeled my decision an odd brand of silent grace. Beatrice would likely call it a tactical error in our family politics. Neither label mattered to the man who kept the records. Mercy and error belong to people who care about winning arguments. I only cared about the balance remaining correct at the end of the day. The Ashwood municipal basement remained dim and steady. No police officers arrived at the heavy wooden door. No emergency council sessions convened under the flickering fluorescent lights in the hallway. The town continued its ordinary routine, without a ripple on the surface of public life. Completely unaware of the verdict I withheld, I opened a fresh page in the daily logbook. The fountain pen nib scratched against the lined paper. I wrote down the current date and the temperature reading from the mercury thermometer hanging on the wall. The numbers lined up in straight columns without any fuss. Nothing needed to be corrected by force. The records spoke for themselves without any extra shouting from my end. Some debts are simply better left uncollected. A ledger balances itself when you stop forcing new entries into the dark margins. I closed the register and set the brass lamp back in its proper alignment on the desk. The room stayed quiet. That was enough for any municipal librarian who valued lasting peace over temporary power. Silence was always a much better punishment than any judgment a local court could ever formally hand down. The old books on the shelves held enough drama already. There was no need for me to write another chapter of misery. The Ashwood municipal basement felt remarkably quiet now that the formal audit was finished and all the ledgers were properly balanced. Morning light filtered through the frosted glass windows along the northern wall. I wiped the wooden desktop with a clean cotton rag before sitting down on my chair. Father Timothy walked down the concrete steps slowly. He carried a flat parcel wrapped in brown butcher paper under one arm. His breathing sounded slightly labored in the damp air. He placed the parcel directly on the corner of my table. The old priest looked tired but remarkably steady as he approached my wooden desk with a slow, measured, and deliberate step. "These papers belonged in the parish archives years ago," Father Timothy said, his voice dropping low. I untied the coarse string with careful fingers. The old framed wedding photo slid out from the wrapping. It rested against my wooden pen tray without making a sound. It showed our parents standing outside the old stone church. Their expressions were stiff and formal for the heavy brass camera lens, while the cold spring wind blew against their dark coats. My mother wore her lace veil pinned tightly across her hair. The black ink in the register remained dry and undisturbed. Beatrice had always wanted that specific frame restored to the front parlor. Instead, it sat right here on the dark wood, where nobody could argue over ownership. I did not say a word about the missing probate funds. The elderly priest made his own small restitution quietly by returning these forgotten church documents to the municipal wooden shelves. "You have kept this office running without complaint," Father Timothy said, resting his hand near the ink stamp. I nodded once and straightened the neat stack of daily slips. No other person living in the town of Ashwood knew the full extent of the ledger entries stored inside the cedar chest. The dusty church books contained several missing signatures from 1994 that nobody else bothered to search for. He had recovered them from a back room in the rectory after searching through 3 metal filing cabinets. It was a minor redemption, but it mattered in a town like this. Ashwood relied on quiet books to function properly. We understood each other without further explanation. The old man reached out and touched the corner of the wooden frame gently. He turned and walked back up the stone stairs. The heavy wooden door clicked shut firmly behind his retreating figure as he climbed back into the pale afternoon light. Silence settled over the subterranean room once more. I placed the wedding photo beside the brass lamp. The circulation register remained open on the Ashwood desk. My pen rested quietly beside the black inkwell. The room was entirely mine. Nothing else needed to be adjusted. You know how memories fade. People leave behind small traces in ashwood without ever checking the dates. A library slip keeps the truth long after the voices stop. I placed the framed wedding photo back on the shelf near the small window. Beatrice stood by the wooden desk. She looked at the surface where the black binder used to rest. Her jaw tightened for a single second. The sharp words stayed unsaid. She did not raise her voice. She simply stared at the empty space with sudden, heavy stillness. You understand that some victories require no noise at all. I picked up my pencil. I turned to a clean page in the daily logbook. The municipal basement stayed quiet. Father Timothy watched from the doorway, his hands folded over his coat. Beatrice looked straight at me then. Her eyes searched my face for any sign of pride or anger. She found only steady patience. She swallowed hard, her lips parting slightly before she turned and walked away into the cold afternoon.